Look at this list. The names are made up, the real ones are confidential, but a list like this one exists for every province in Canada and every state in the US. They're not long lists, maybe a dozen or so names max. The people in this column are dying, and for most of them, there's someone in this column who's eager to save them and can. But instead, because of a small problem in how these lists are kept, people in this column will die. The story behind these lists takes place in the world of transplant, a world with no shortage of ethical dilemmas, medical mysteries, and human drama. But this story takes place in just one corner of that world. It's the story of deadly odds, one man's ingenious solution, and failure. If you need a new organ, you go on a wait list to get one from a deceased donor. But there's a problem. There aren't enough organs for everyone, not even close. As you get sicker, you move up the list. As the months and years go by, you hope that an organ becomes available before the condition that put you on this list in the first place finally kills you. About 40% of people die with their name on this list. It's terrible and, in many ways, preventable. And one of those ways has to do with these lists, the ones I showed you at the beginning. Because, while most organs can only come from someone who's died, 2 organs don't follow that rule: livers and kidneys. These organs can come from someone who's still alive and well. If you're someone who needs either a liver or a kidney, you can try to find someone to give you theirs.
And if their blood type's a match, they're a candidate.
I mean, surgeons check that everything is in order, that they're roughly the right body size, they don't have any underlying health conditions, but if all that is in order, the surgery goes ahead. You bypass this horrible list. In the case of a kidney, the donor gives you 1 of theirs. In the case of a liver, the donor gives you half of theirs, and it grows back to full size in both of you. Living transplant is wild to think about, but all you need to know is that when it comes to finding a match, blood type is the critical factor. And while that might seem simple, it's not that easy to find. Trust me, I have been in this position. I got a liver transplant from my friend Robbie in 2020, and I just happened to share his blood type. But that's rare, and it's a big reason why only 5 to 10% of transplants come from living donors. Okay, so back to these lists, type I showed you at the beginning, with these pairs of names. To make sense of what you're looking at, I want you to imagine someone we'll call Sarah. Sarah needs a kidney, and so she's waiting on that big transplant list and getting sicker and sicker. But she takes matters into her own hands. She finds a friend, Jake, who's willing to be her living donor to give her a kidney. There's hope. They go to the hospital. They get tests done. It's over. Jake's blood type is B positive, and she's A negative. And like that small glimmer of hope disappears. Maybe she'll find another donor, but with A negative blood, only 13% of people are a match. Her odds aren't good. That used to be the end of this story. But then, in 1986, there's this German-born New York doctor, Felix Rappaport. Rappaport was sick of seeing willing donors turned away because they weren't a blood type match for their particular recipient, their friend. And he came up with a solution. He called it paired exchange. What he imagined was a list of pairs. In one column, everyone in the country like Sarah, who needs a kidney. And in the next column, beside them, their donor, like Jake, who's ready to help but just doesn't have the right blood type. To make the whole thing work, each name would be labeled with that person's blood type. In Rappaport's mind, with a long enough list like this, you'd quickly find another pair that were a perfect counterpart for Jake and Sarah. A pair where the donor, who isn't a match for his friend, is a match for Sarah. And likewise, Jake, who isn't a match for his friend, is a match for that person's friend. Those 4 people could then go into 4 adjacent operating rooms, and with a swap, 2 lives could be saved. And the idea worked. 5 years later, in 1991, the first paired exchange transplant was performed in Korea. It was a breakthrough, proof that his idea could save lives. It wasn't an easy sell. It took about 2 decades before North America caught on. But in 2009, the first one was done at Toronto General Hospital, a few blocks from where I am right now. And today, paired exchange programs have led to 1,000 kidney transplants in Canada and 1,000 every year in the US. And this is where things get frustrating, because I didn't have a kidney transplant. I had a liver transplant. And if I was like Sarah, if Robbie's blood type hadn't matched mine, then there's a good chance I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And the frustrating story behind why that is, that brings us back to these lists, the kind from the beginning. These lists are the exact same as the big list I showed you a second ago for kidneys, except the people on these lists need a liver. But tragically, unlike kidneys, where there's one big list for the whole country, these names are divided with a separate list for each province in Canada and each state in the US. If Sarah and Jake were on this list, finding a pair where the donor matches her blood type and Jake matches theirs is reduced to a tiny fraction of what it could be. And in the US, it's often even worse. Usually there aren't even state lists. Instead, each hospital network keeps their own separate list. For people on those lists, there could be a matching pair nearby, just down the street. But that match will never be made. I'm going to talk about why this is in a second, but first, I want to talk about why this really matters. And that's because of 2 things in transplant that make livers very different from kidneys. First, even more than kidneys, liver failure is incredibly lethal. You see, even if a person's kidneys completely fail, with dialysis, that patient can be kept alive for decades. This isn't the same for livers. If your liver stops working, you have, on average, 1 day. If there's an organ where finding a living donor is urgent, it's the liver. And the second fact is that kidneys account for 97% of all transplants from living donors. Livers account for less than 3%. And so liver transplant patients and their pairs on these lists are searching for a matching pair from an already tiny pool. What this means is that for a group where time is of the essence and where a paired exchange system like this is most desperately needed, their already short list of potential pairs gets chopped down to a tiny fraction of its already small size. And thousands of people who could be saved won't be. But it's the very fact that this pool is small, the fact that livers account for only a small fraction of transplants from living donors. That's the real reason these lists stay separated. Like I said, this list is not separated for kidneys. For kidneys, there's this huge national list. For the past decade in the US, that list has been kept by the National Kidney Registry. And here in Canada, that list is managed by Canadian Blood Services. And when I asked them about why these liver lists remain divided, the answer I got was surprising. People within the organization have been pushing for a national list for liver paired exchange for more than a decade, ever since the kidney one was set up to begin with. But they say developing a program like this for livers would take a multi-million-dollar investment and years of work. And the most depressing part of this whole thing is that I'm sure they're right. Between privacy groups, administrative checks, ethics reviews, legal reviews, meeting with hospital boards and health boards, I'm sure the bill would come out in the millions. Year over year, health systems have become bigger and more complex. And that complexity means that every process takes longer and is more expensive, to the point that fixing a problem as simple as this, as merging lists, can't be justified on the economics alone, even to save lives, especially since livers account for only a small fraction of transplants from living donors. Paired exchange is an innovative idea, an elegant solution to a serious problem, but it only works if it brings big groups of people together. That was Rappaport's vision. And the national list for kidney paired exchange proves that we can pull this off and save thousands of lives. But unless something changes, I'm not sure this will ever happen for livers in Canada or the US. And maybe the biggest reason for that has to do with these lists themselves. These lists are not public. Again, these names are fake. And that's good, it should be private. But it also means that the outrage won't be there, because when one of the would-be recipients in this column dies, they won't know, their family won't know, and the public won't know.
If a simple change, just combining these lists, would have saved their life.